Hi there, I'm David Millar-Durrant from Sig.Network, and I'm going to be your moderator today. You guys mind if we just go around and everyone introduce yourselves, talk a bit about what your project does and why it matters?
Sure. Hey, I'm Tomer, Chief Product at the Stellar Development Foundation. Stellar, in case you're new in the space, has been around for a while, since 2014. A blockchain that's really focused on real-world utility and equitable access. Has been processing more than 100 transactions per second for a while. So yeah.
My name is Ethan, although online and on Twitter I use the alias Tabasco. I do developer relations at Particle.Network. That means a lot of different things. I do a lot of marketing and space and stuff like that. Particle is essentially what we've been doing for a long time is like user experience related things. So how do we sort of make Web3 feel a lot more like Web2? How do we build things that can ease the kind of barrier to entry to Web3 from a user perspective? And so what we've been doing for a long time was things like social logins, account abstraction, and what we've been really focusing on over the past year is chain abstraction. So we're lucky enough to be in one of the kind of group of some of the original organizations alongside Zion that really started focusing on chain abstraction, December, January. And we've been building out this thing called universal accounts, which essentially gives users a single balance that they can use anywhere. So if I have 10 USDC on Base and 10 on Arbitrum, then I have 20 and I can use it collectively. So that's essentially what we're building, and that's kind of our position in this space.
I'm Ash. I'm running technology at the Burnt Zion chain. And yeah, we are basically trying to figure out we can't move this industry forward until it's dead simple to use these technologies for normal people. You shouldn't have to know how every aspect of your bank works, how every aspect of a website you use works in order to use it. And what are the tools that we need to put together to make that possible? And how can we make it so that every developer doesn't need to reinvent the wheel for those things?
So this is a panel about modularity and user experience. Those seem like sort of relatively disparate concepts on the face of it. So it's sort of a challenge, which is when things aren't modular, when they're a monolith, how does that affect user experiences, and why is modularity important to improving that? Do you mind if I start with you?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. I think that first, to start off, as an industry, we've been making this pretty massive transition towards modularity. And now modularity is a lot of time used as a buzzword, but it was most often used in the context of things like Celestia, allowing blockchains to have things like swappable DA layers and things of this nature to be honest, allow for the idea of an app chain rollup centric future. And so the way that Celestia kind of envisions it, and we also tend to align ourselves with this vision, is that moving forward, we're going to have most applications, large applications that use their own app chains. And these are typically modular blockchains, so you can scale really quickly. You can have hundreds, thousands of them. I think even Nick White, he says millions of rollups. This is the future that we're moving towards. And so from a user experience perspective, when you look at the broader ecosystem, this is my opinion, but I think that we've moved to a point in Web3 now where it's important to have a lot of sovereign block space, distributed block space. And we have to the point now where block space is incredibly abundant. And so applications can create environments where they can scale almost infinitely in isolated environments where it's resilient and it's reliable. And so when you're looking at creating things that can rival or equate to Web2, you need something that is incredibly resilient and that is scalable. And we've seen that this is hard to achieve on especially with massive scaling applications on single generalized layer 2s, for example. And so app chains and modular blockchains offer a solution to that to some degree and allow you to kind of build this ecosystem where we have 1,000 app chains and there's these massive applications that are all running their own kind of sovereign blockchains. And so there's a lot of really interesting implications of that. So the future that I think we'll see from a user experience perspective is that I'll use an application that's built on an app chain. Some applications will be built on generalized blockchains, some will be built on some random rollup. I mean, it doesn't matter. Developers will choose where to build based on the needs for their application, and that, in my opinion, will probably scale us to thousands of blockchains. And so the ideal state, and I'm sure we'll get into this later though, is that if we have thousands of blockchains, users will interact with these without knowing that they're using multiple different chains. So they just use Web3 collectively. Even though they're interacting with chain A, chain B, chain C, app chain here, generalized blockchain, they don't know. They're just using the applications. And these applications are allowed to scale almost to an unlimited degree because of this architectural unlock.
Stellar used to be sort of a little bit of a monolith back in the day. I mean, you guys have been around so long, you've it seems a bit unfair to judge you by today's names. But what made you start to think modularity makes sense?
Sure. So yeah, Stellar's been around for a while, and it's quite the workhorse is what I was looking for. Horse dog is an interesting.
Could be that too.
Yeah. So it's been processing a lot of transactions for a while. We've had, we have companies like Franklin Templeton, like MoneyGram, like WisdomTree, all kind of like active on the network, and we've been like thinking about scalability for a while now, a lot before modular became like the hype word that it is today. And in the past, this used to mean things like payment channels and state channels in the old days. Today we actually launched our smart contract platform earlier this year. It's called Soroban. And when we did that, we actually went to a lot of other ecosystems and kind of like ask around developers, about their experience developing for other ecosystems. And one recurring theme was that modularity is a pain in the ass. Especially this is like a NEAR conference, and I love NEAR, and I think it's amazing. But one recurring theme specifically with NEAR developers was that cross-contract interactions were like so difficult because NEAR is built for sharding, and so you don't have like atomic composability. And so, what we realized is that, yes, modularity is very important. We've definitely put some building blocks for it, but I think that for an ecosystem that is struggling for product market fit, and I'm talking about the on-chain economy in general, we're struggling for product market fit, and I think that making design decisions that make it harder for developers and for users to engage is kind of like the wrong thing to do right now. So, yes, eventually we will need, super modular world, but I think, like you said, there's so much block space available right now, cheap block space available in monolith networks, that I think we're kind of like jumping too fast towards the end game instead of like really focused on product market fit right now.
That makes a lot of sense. Ash, you're trying to sort of smooth the edges a bit between, at Burnt, you're trying to smooth the edges a little bit between all this kind of different stuff. Can you talk a bit about that and like how you think it helps user experiences to either how modularity helps or hinders people when trying to use these sort of various technologies?
It's funny because in the Web3 space, we've taken a lot of these lessons that we've learned in like the startup ecosystem for rapid technology development and just kind of thrown them all away. So, if you went back 10 years, you'd see all of these frameworks like Ruby on Rails or Django or whatever, and they make a lot of, educated guesses about what the best way to develop an application is, but then give you the tools to deviate from that when necessary. We've kind of taken the approach of, hey, let's just throw a bunch of Legos on the ground and assume that developers love being miserable and that they want to put it all together themselves every time. And that's nonsense. Most good developers are trying to launch an actual product and get users to use it. If you're really focusing on the intricacies of your stack and that's all you care about, you're probably not going to make it. And it's not really, we shouldn't be optimizing for that kind of developer. So part of this like modularity, modularity is great. It lets you make your own choices, but it should be something you can opt into when necessary, not something you have to resolve day one before you can actually work on the core competency of your business.
I find normally developers who are doing technology for technology's sake love Legos, and developers who are doing technology for product's sake tend to like things that are a little bit more monolithic sometimes.
I also love Legos, but mostly to kind of turn my brain off from product decisions.
So at Particle, you're building a modular blockchain for accounts. How did you guys start doing that? Specifically, how does it work? And what problems what are the biggest problems you think it solves?
Yeah, so I think when we were first kind of deciding how do we want to market our chain abstraction solution, we made a mistake actually, and we used the term blockchain or layer one to describe the architecture of what we're doing, and it is. We are actually building a chain that essentially coordinates accounts, but what we found is that a lot of people focus on that aspect of what we do a lot, whereas really the core product of what we build is the account itself. And the account itself exists on any EVM chain, Solana, stuff like that. And so it is coordinated by a chain that we build, and it exists on these external chains. And so to take a step back, essentially, the problem that we identified, back in, I think we started November, December of last year, is that, like, assuming that we are continuing to go down the path of like app chains and rollups and stuff like this, and more and more blockchains, which I think is inevitable, only just from an incentive standpoint, but in terms of scalability and things of this nature, I think that's a path that we're going down. If we do go down that path, there's this massive unanswered problem from a user experience perspective, which is, how do I move between these chains? How do I use applications on these different chains? And so what we expect users to do today is, okay, I go to an application on chain A, I have my balance on chain A, and I want to move to an application on chain B. So now there's two things I need to do as a user. I need to go and manually bridge, and I need to cognitively manage the fact that I now have two distinct balances across these different chains. And now scale this to 50 applications. If I'm managing 50 different balances and bridging between each of these applications, this is just a massive issue for end users. And this pretty much restricts any sort of future in which we really have more than even a few hundred blockchains, which I think that's the path that we're going down, but it's not possible until we fix that user experience friction. And so our solution to that was something called universal accounts, which is what we call account-level chain abstraction. Chain abstraction is a big buzzword that's been thrown around recently, but the way that we look at it is essentially just eliminating the need for users to do manual actions to move between chains. So universal accounts are super simple. It just, if I have a balance, I can use it on any chain. And that's all they do. So if I have 5 USDC on Base, I can go and use it on Arbitrum and Solana, and my balances are collective everywhere. And so it's just like as if everything were built on Ethereum or Near or whatever, you get that same experience, but across the entire landscape. And so where the actual chain that we're building, which is actually a Cosmos app chain, that falls into it through coordination of these accounts. So these are smart accounts, and it gets a little bit technical, but smart accounts, especially under the ERC 437 standard within Ethereum, it's difficult to manage state across different chains, and so we have something called it's akin to a key store rollup, if anybody's heard of that term. And so we do something similar to this, and we can coordinate both the state of these smart accounts as well as the solvers that move funds across chains. So it gets a little bit in the weeds of exactly how that all functions, but it is essentially enabling this functionality of giving you a unified balance that you can use universally across the ecosystem. And so it's a pretty cool experience once you give it a try. It really does feel like you're just using one chain everywhere.
That sounds super cool. At Stellar, what products are you most excited about that touch things that aren't just Stellar?
Sure. So I would like to comment on one thing that was said, which is I think that a lot of the problems that we're solving in these rooms of crypto conferences relate to crypto native users. And I think that as an industry, we kind of need to step away from that for a second and think about adoption and what that looks like, and are these really going to be crypto native users that are using multiple chains and need to do sophisticated interactions across these chains? I don't think at Stellar we don't think that's the case, and so a lot of the users in the Stellar ecosystem have no idea that they're using a blockchain. They have no idea that they're using Stellar. They're just using a wallet that's built for normies. They probably don't even hold an asset of a crypto asset. From their perspective, they're holding digital dollars, or they're holding a digital stable coin of a Mexican peso or something like that. But at the end of the day, they are getting the benefits of self-custody and these financial instruments that are across borders, right? So, and this is at the end of the day, we still think that kind of financial access, equitable access, is the killer product in the world of blockchains. And so at the end of the day, the people that are using this, they don't care about moving between chains. They don't care about speculation. They just care about having access to a regular checking account, a regular savings account, things that we see for granted in the West, but don't necessarily exist in a lot of kind of excluded communities.
I found it interesting that you drew a stark distinction between crypto users and non-crypto users. And you said non-crypto users just want to do things to get on with their day, and crypto users just want to have a good time.
They love fucking around, yeah.
Do do you see a situation, like, what do you think we need to get serious users trying to do serious things to identify as crypto users? Because it seems like in the space right now, we try and hide the fact that people are using crypto if they're trying to pay someone across borders, and we sort of say they have the benefit of self-custody and self-sovereignty. But why do we need to hide the benefits from that, if you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think like this industry is still at a point in time in which we kind of like obsess over the platform itself. But at the end of the day, if you look at something as big as like the internet, in the mid '90s when I joined the internet, yes, like being an internet user was like part of your identity, right? You're like you're not like the normal people. You're an internet user. But now it doesn't exist, right? So I think like at the end of the day, there won't be, crypto will just be another infrastructure layer that exists. And, the same way that, people who grow into the world like tech today, they don't have this notion of like these basic technical primitives like the internet. Even like a file system is something that's like slowly disappearing from the knowledge base of like kids, and that's like completely okay. So the idea of like crypto being something that you need to be a user of hopefully will disappear, and everything that matters will just be applications built on top of it.
And at Burnt, you guys have really sort of gone in deep for this whole making crypto for people who don't care about crypto. Can you talk a bit about what you did there and kind of what do you see in terms of user behavior that's different from other chains as a result of that?
Oh, there's so many ways to go with this. We started originally trying to make a consumer application on Solana and suffered greatly with the available technology at that time. Basically, we were like, okay, hey, at the time the NFT craze was a thing. How can we bring this to, the masses so that they can, use their community, raise some money, get some engagement, do what the dream is supposed to be. And it was almost functionally impossible to build the tooling for us to do it, let alone someone who doesn't have a technological background. So then we were like, all right, we have to take a step back here. How do we solve these problems? How do we make it easier to connect, to share, to deploy these tools? Like, can we give you pieces to put together? And like, all right, even those are a struggle. So now we have to take it back another layer. One thing that we've kind of noticed is that a lot of our enthusiastic users don't have this crypto self-identification, right? They like the community. They like that everybody's excited. They're not bragging about how difficult everything is and how their struggle is somehow more valuable. Like, they just want to do the fun part. They don't want to, if we were competing on who's having the most difficult user onboarding, we're not going to win. So like that's basically our whole design approach, is kind of take it back to the pre-crypto era. How do we cut every 0.1% off of user friction, off of onboarding flow? Like, we need to get more people through, because that's how the product works.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually ask you a quick question. I think after everything was said, and including what you said, in terms of a lot of Zion's users, for example, being not crypto native, or at least they don't identify that way. I think it comes down to sort of like how you view how the space is going to evolve. If you think that the ecosystem is going to basically consist of a large number of like disparate networks, or if it's mostly going to be onboarding into 2, 3, 4, 5 blockchains, I think the necessity for things like chain abstraction or multi-chain changes a lot, right? Do you think that, let's say in 10 years, like we can have it be super long term, users are going to onboard in the ecosystem collectively as if, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, like thousands of app chains, or are we going to see more of a consolidation into a few blockchains in which users go and they use applications in that ecosystem, and if I want to go use applications in a different ecosystem, then I do that explicitly? How do you think that dynamic would look like?
I definitely think that the future is multi-chain long term. It is a question of like, how many chains are we talking about? Thousands? Or are we talking about dozens or 10? I do think that a lot of the value that we're seeing, especially in the world of like DeFi, which like it or not, in terms of kind of like financial innovation, this is a lot of what's interesting in blockchain right now. Does depend on this idea of like atomic composability. It becomes a lot more difficult when you move between chains. Like we're going, and this is very long term, like, our civilization is going multiplanetary. Just in terms of like synchronization and latency, we will need to have like multiple chains. It's like the speed of light. So, we do have these kind of like physical constraints. But I think for the immediate future, where we are right now, a lot of the multi-chain or the modularity stuff seems to be counterproductive to bringing value, to being to bring product market fit right now.
You talk about atomicity there. Web 2 isn't atomic. If I interact with a lot of different applications, or they call a different server, all that kind of stuff. Why is atomicity so much more important for Web 3 than it is for Web 2?
I think this goes back to the question of what blockchains are good for. I would argue that blockchains are good for financial innovation. And in the world of finance, atomicity is extremely important. But
financial markets don't have atomicity.
So any database that is being used at a financial institution across their different instruments is one that supports atomicity.
But if you try to use, if I try and arbitrage between the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and the LSE, that's not going to be an atomic action.
Right, but this is exactly where blockchain actually brings benefits over the existing markets. This ability to trade on a single avenue with atomicity. So we're kind of like, and I think this actually touches on a really important point, that when we break up chains, we're kind of like rolling back some of the benefits that we got by introducing them.
Interesting. If we sort of continue in the direction we're going in terms of user experiences, and continue in the direction we're going in terms of breaking things up or putting them back together, in it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever you feel like answering, what are the actual tangible benefits going to be for users? We talk about the technology of the future, but what does the actual user experience look like? What does it feel like? What do you hope people are going to be doing that they're not doing today? If you don't want to start with.
If we believe in the benefits of blockchains and these trustless, decentralized asset controls, then those benefits should transfer into the applications and the products that are being built. So the ability to control digital things you own, representations that you own, those are kind of conceptual benefits that on their own are not products. Those are things that can be implemented into products to give users benefits, whether those users know it or not, right? Like, back when the internet was more nascent, we introduced TLS to make it harder to, steal information mid-flight for web requests. Users don't care about that, but it keeps them safer, which means that there's fewer fraud instances, fewer ways to mess with people, which makes the products kind of more polished on their own. And I feel like we're going to see this kind of in the same way. It's going to become this infrastructure layer. It's going to kind of fulfill this promise that new types of products can be built on top of, but those products aren't going to be mostly marketing the fact that they're blockchain based. They're going to be using the benefits of the technology. And in a perfect world, the user will never know.
Yeah, I think there's so much to unpack here. I was just trying to think where do I start in terms of what this will look like. But I think first of all, Ash said it perfectly in terms of how users are going to interact with blockchain in the future. I agree 100%. It's going to be through major applications where you don't even know that you're using Web3 and they use benefits of blockchain visibly. I think to look at it from another angle specifically to where we're at today and how we're going to be, how it's going to be evolving over time. I also think another really good point was made in terms of like the fact that today there is a lack of product market fit in a lot of areas, and that we're focusing a lot on infrastructure, right? And not a lot on like apps. And so this is also a big conversation that's in this space. It's like, oh, okay, we're investing too much in infrastructure. Like, where are the apps, right? And so I think this is a good point too. The way that I see it, and it's from a perspective that is very, kind of based in the vision that I mentioned a moment ago, which is app chains and chain abstraction, things like this. So it's a little bit biased, but I think that we have a fundamental problem with incentives in the space right now, which is that developers, because the space has grown to be so fragmented, I think if we're all building just on Solana or on one chain, this wouldn't be the case. But because we're already at a point where there are hundreds of blockchains, incentives are a little bit tricky for developers in this space, because if I deploy on Base, my addressable market is users on Base, and my competition are dApps on Base for the most part. I mean, sometimes if you grow large enough, then sometimes your competition is other ecosystems. But this is because users have to cognitively and manually go into each of these ecosystems and then use them and move to another ecosystem and use applications in there. So it creates these kind of like isolated markets in this space. And so I think this has created an environment where it's difficult for applications to capture a lot of value very quickly, because there's not like one place to build where they can capture all Web3 users, unless they build something incredible like Polymarket, which gets people across kind of the chain borders. So I think that things like chain abstraction, as we mentioned a moment ago, will help alleviate these problems and allow developers to build anywhere that they want and basically address the entire market of Web3 with their application without needing people to bridge into the chain that they deploy on, or kind of do something manual or whatever. Like, they just deploy in one place and they can address the entire current market, which I think will, in the short term, allow people to focus more on user-centric experiences. And so I think over time what we're going to see is that I really do believe that in a few years there's going to be hundreds, maybe thousands of blockchains we're going to have. We already have hundreds, and so it just, the incentives are there. From a scalability standpoint, it's important. And so I think for most users, they're going to onboard to an application, which is probably built on an app chain or some rollup or something. And again, they're not even going to know that they're on a blockchain. If they go and use another application, they don't even know that that's on a different blockchain. They just use applications. And so this is, I think, the direction that we're moving in, and where blockchain becomes an infrastructural choice for developers as they're building their application. And it doesn't impede on the user experience. It's just a component that allows them to build something unique. And so I think that this is the direction that's enabled in large part by chain abstraction, modularity, things of that nature.
But isn't it market dynamics that eventually kind of like developers will concentrate around specific ecosystems? Do you actually think that a developer will look at a list of hundreds of blockchains and choose one from these?
I mean, Bitcoin's the biggest blockchain, but I'm not going to deploy my social app on it.
Well, you can't. Yeah.
I think a lot of developers choose it. I mean, developers will give you different answers, but it comes down to sometimes grants or fees or whatever, different technological properties of these different chains where they choose to deploy. But I think sometimes it comes down to like, where are the users, right? So if all these users are on Base or Solana, then I'm not going to go and deploy on like Dog Chain, because like there's no users over there. So why would I deploy there? And so I think this creates a dynamic where a lot of those decisions are driven by fragmented and isolated user bases to some degree.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk about the subject. Really great conversation, and appreciate you making the effort.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.